wake up, stand up, and speak up.
I'm here at a detransitioner rally in San Diego. We're outside of a pediatric medical conference, and these folks are out here protesting. They say that doctors are using experimental methods to treat gender dysphoria in children, and they say that gender-affirming care has gone too far.
Children cannot consent.
I am a detransitioner. I'm with a group of detransitioners. We are here to speak out against the sterilization and mutilation of children.
The definition of detransitioner is specific to the individual, but usually means someone who was trans but no longer is, and has since stopped medical treatments to support their transition. It's become an increasingly politicized term. As a trans journalist, talking about this topic feels extremely scary, mainly because talking about detransitioners is fraud.
Hitler's doctors mutilated and experimented on children.
They did.
Pick the side of history you want to be on.
Major medical organizations cite that medical treatment for gender dysphoria, like puberty blockers or hormones, are both safe and medically necessary. And for so many people, me included, it's life-saving care. But that hasn't stopped conservative lawmakers from leveraging a small group of voices to restrict access to trans healthcare at large.
My parents were told that the options were transition or suicide.
I cannot even cry or raise my voice. I was silenced.
I was misled to believe that these procedures were perfectly safe.
And it's working. Just this year, more than 500 bills targeting trans rights have been introduced across 49 states, a sharp increase since 2015. These proposals include criminalizing doctors and healthcare providers and could redefine child abuse to include those who support medical transition for anyone under 18. And while it may seem like there are a large number of detransitioner voices raising alarm, it's actually the same few providing the most graphic testimony in support of these bills across the country.
I am dealing with genital atrophy.
I have blood clots in my urine.
And all of my joints ache.
We must prevent this nightmare from happening to any more young people.
One of these detransitioners is Kat Kattinson. When she was 28, she started taking testosterone but stopped after 4 months when she developed throat pain.
Castration is not a treatment for mental illness.
When did you decide to speak out about your story?
Initially, I didn't speak out about detransitioning because I didn't want to do anything to harm the trans community. But I did realize just how little support and knowledge there is about detransitioners. There's no medical codes for detransitioners. And I feel like right now minors transitioning is an emergency situation.
Why do you think there aren't more people speaking out?
There are more that are slowly coming forward, but it's scary to put yourself out there. It's terrifying, actually. I've received death threats, bullying, and harassment. I'm constantly being told I'm a child killer and that I have blood on my hands of trans kids and things like that. It's not easy at all.
Do you ever worry that what you're saying may have consequences that you can't foresee?
I don't think that what I'm doing is causing harm. I think certain politicians and public figures that bring up the gender issue are using that to get votes from people. But oftentimes, the right is the only side that cares about detransitioners and is willing to listen to and amplify their stories.
A lot of people have called you transphobic, have called these bills transphobic. How do you see them?
The word transphobia implies hatred and bigotry towards people who identify as transgender. I do not hate anyone, and my desire to prevent people from suffering from lifelong health issues is coming from a place of love. I do think that people who affirm, providers who affirm, are doing so from a good place as well. But I do believe that that leads to harm.
Hi, it's so nice to finally
Dr.
meet you.
Meredith McNamara specializes in adolescent medicine and provides gender-affirming care to minors, something she's had to defend in response to testimonies like Kat's.
I think that the concerned public really responds to human stories. It becomes a concerning problem when anecdotes are being used to decide the fates of many, and that's fundamentally unscientific.
If you're turning on the TV, you see narratives about children are being butchered, people are experimenting on children with gender-affirming care. What do you make of all that? How does that make you feel?
In order to ban care for something, you really have to try to chip away at the existence of the condition for which care is being sought. So when people say things like social contagion is real, or gender dysphoria is other mental illnesses, or talk therapy is appropriate as the only treatment, what they're really saying is that transgender identity and gender dysphoria don't exist. The next thing you might hear would be false claims about safety, false claims about the evidence. And then the final thing is just attacks on medical authority. So medical organizations are advocacy groups, they're biased, liberal, leftist, ideological machines, that sort of thing.
How often are you recommending surgery to adolescents under the age of 18?
So I've never recommended surgery for gender-affirming purposes in my life, because that kind of describes like a prescriptive model that we're not doing, that doesn't really exist. It's not a medicalized conveyor belt that you hop on and you can't get off until you get to the end.
There aren't solid numbers on how many people detransition or why, in part because long-term and large-scale studies are scarce. But their impact is inarguably outsized. Current bills could limit healthcare for up to 300,000 trans kids nationally. And that's not accidental. We just landed in Chicago and we're going to meet Kai Shevers. She's a former detransitioner who feels like her story was co-opted by the anti-trans movement. Kai Shevers medically transitioned from female to male in 2006, but began detransitioning 5 years later. She now uses she/her pronouns and identifies as transmasculine. While detransitioning, Kai turned to the internet for support, and she was slowly indoctrinated by people she says are anti-trans radical feminists. Over the next 6 years, she worked alongside them.
The right in particular has specifically kind of like sought out detransition people's stories they can use because they feel like that can kind of like, that it works better like effective propaganda. I was talking to someone who wanted to believe that all transmasculine people transition because of unresolved trauma, and that to heal from that, you had to sort of like reclaim being female. So, I had this unresolved trauma about my mom committing suicide, and I had come to believe, my transness was motivated by that unresolved trauma, and to heal from that, I would have to stop being trans.
And so when did you realize, wait a second, I think there's something more insidious going on?
Boy, the real significant wake-up call was some anti-trans feminists decided to, ally with the right, like ally with conservative Christian groups. And I was absolutely horrified. I was like, well, how can you claim to be against the patriarchy when you're working with them? So I was basically like, well, the only reason you would want to work with these people is if you just hated trans people. We really should reach out to some of the people that have been protesting.
Eventually, Kai understood what happened to her to be a type of conversion therapy. In order to reckon with that experience, she needed to find out who was behind it. She and her partner Lee discovered that seemingly independent doctors and psychotherapists supporting their group were actually connected to major conservative political powerhouses. Their work was validated in March when thousands of leaked emails revealed a coordinated effort between conservative state legislators, think tanks, lawyers, and gender-critical feminists to further an anti-trans agenda.
There's a lot of different organizations that pass themselves off as something that they're not. The American College of Pediatricians, which is a conservative Christian group that pretends to be a legitimate medical organization so they can spread, anti-gay and trans and anti-reproductive right crap while trying to pretend to be scientific.
Why do you feel the need to do this research? Why is it important right now?
Just to make sure we can survive. How do we take this movement down so we can get on with our lives of just, living as people?
The divisive political climate leaves little room for nuance. Some detransitioners feel caught between detrans activists and their former trans communities. So this is your studio?
It is.
I went to Canada to visit Maddie, who has asked that we only use her first name. Is this usually what you do? You make little diorama setups?
Yeah, I sometimes do that. I sometimes just make miniature foods. I got started making miniatures in high school. I find it very therapeutic. I can just get really lost in it. I don't think very much when I'm working, and that's really nice.
She first began her transition at 15 and eventually started taking testosterone and got top surgery when she was 21. 2 years later, she detransitioned. She has never shared her story publicly before.
What made you decide to detransition?
I had received an autism diagnosis, and things that had once made sense to me as being about gender suddenly were very clearly stemming from autism. Things like my discomfort with my body, and then I started to feel regret. I started to wonder if my disability...
Your disability meaning autism?
Yeah.
Okay.
Had impacted this. Why was that never explored with the doctors I'd seen? I felt very upset about that. I learned pretty quickly that people really don't like talking about this, and they don't like talking about regrets or doubts. I just felt very alone.
Sounds like you were looking for people to talk to about what you'd experienced.
Yeah, I found it quite difficult to navigate because I was very concerned about my story being weaponized.
By who?
The right wing really, really liked to use these stories of transition regret in attempts to ban transition or to demonstrate that it doesn't work for anyone.
Do you believe in banning gender-affirming care?
I don't. I think there are some people who benefit from it, and probably some people who really do need it to live happy lives. I don't think the system as it is now is serving everybody who goes through it, but I think bans are a severe overreaction.
Our children are not guinea pigs for science experimentation, and we cannot allow people to make money off mutilating them.
It's clear conservative lawmakers have turned gender-affirming care into a key wedge issue. They are calling the very idea of transness into question, and the resulting bans are having a major negative impact on trans people's mental and physical health. The reality is, so many of us, detransitioners included, want the freedom to live authentic, healthy lives, and want access to care that supports that. But when healthcare is legislated in black and white ways, that freedom hangs in the balance.
What do you say to the detransitioners who say, I feel like I was hurt by the medical system?
I would never go so far as to cast doubt on somebody else's lived experiences. But the narrative that describes the standard of care is very off base.
Do you think there is enough evidence for gender-affirming care?
Yeah, I do. There is enough evidence to show that it benefits a lot of people. We do need more evidence. We need bigger studies. We need longer follow-up periods. But if these laws and these policy actions are allowed to stand, we're not going to be able to do that.